It was a sunny, beautiful day. A father and son are standing on a hill looking down at the workers cutting down trees. The father asks his son what he thinks about a question. What does he think is the most necessary virtue for a lord? The son looks at his father with curiosity and uncertainty. He is surprised by this turn of events. Why this question? He answers uncertainly that it is probably generosity. The father says that this is not a bad answer. The son then asks, what is the right answer if he is wrong? The father replies that the most important virtue for a lord is a kind and warm heart. The father is Richard Valencia, Lord Leshill. The son did not understand his father's answer and asked him if he thought he had a good heart. Then the father began to explain that the virtue required of a lord depends on the situation in each case. A lord must be able to be a friend, a part of the family, and sometimes a villain. And his son must learn to be in all these different roles. And no matter what situation he finds himself in, as long as he does his best, he will be able to form an alliance with anyone he meets in his life. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from outside. A laborer was running toward them with a question. When the worker came running up, he apologized for interrupting their conversation and asked the Lord to do one thing he knew of, if it was not difficult. Richard replied that yes, he would do it without any problem. But before he did, he asked his son Simon and the laborer Charles to step aside. The tired laborer breathed a sigh of relief. And the Lord stretched out his hand and began to say the spell. Simon watched his father's magic with admiration. Richard summoned a portal from which waves of black magic began to erupt, covering the ground in front of him. Where the magic hit the ground, it began to boil and bubble. From this boiling liquid, skeletal hands began to appear. And in a second, almost a dozen full-length skeletons rose from the puddle with the characteristic sound of bones clattering. The skeletons began to stare at Simon and the worker. With a smile, the worker pointed to the skeletons at a pile of large trunks that the workers had cut down earlier. They looked at him carefully, and then at the trunks that were pointed out to them, and walked over to them. In a moment, they began to move them to the joyful applause of the worker, who was glad to be able to take a break. The worker was very grateful and thanked the foreman loudly. He replied that he had no problem with that, as long as the worker continued to work hard. Simon was proud of what a great necromancer his father was, that he could provide his workers with additional labor using skeletons. A small digression follows, which tells the story of necromancers. In this world, necromancers are special magicians who use black and dark magic. With its help, they can summon and revive long-dead creatures. Once upon a time, an emperor lived in this world who wanted to destroy necromancers so that they could not influence his empire in any way. He ruled the empire of Thalhern, and for this task he sent 50,000 soldiers. This army was called the Rose Brigade. The headquarters of the necromancers was in Kizen, and they knew what the emperor was planning against them, so 10 necromancers opposed the emperor's army. Only 10 necromancers, but all 50,000 soldiers of the Rose Brigade were destroyed and turned into the undead. Thus began the destruction of the empire. The destruction of the Rose Brigade eventually led to the surrender of the remnants of the Thalhern Empire. In order to take revenge on the arrogant emperor, necromancers turned him into the undead. And the emperor met his miserable end in the form of a rotting corpse, permanently sitting on the throne of the empire. Thus began a new era of necromancers' rule. They were able to conquer half of the entire continent without meeting any worthy resistance. But another force stopped and threatened the dominance of the necromancers, ruling the other half of the continent. These were the priests. The only antagonists of the necromancers who served and worshipped the goddess Devi. But for now, there was a fragile peace between the two opposing forces on the continent. But this did not apply to our domain, where the workers and the undead worked together. Under the watchful eye of their lord, who also liked the way they worked together. This was the town of Leshill. Here, too, humans and undead worked well together, and the power of necromancers was used for good. If you look at the map, it is barely visible, surrounded by large cities and castles. Not even all the neighboring villages knew about the existence of this town. Our main character's name is Simon. He is the heir to this property, and in the future he is to become its lord. He is still a very young and joyful boy, but his father was sure that he had a great future ahead of him. So, the Academy of Necromancers and a Genius Recruit. This is the title of our fascinating story, which I invite you to dive into. Simon returned home after helping his father. They had a small, but nice house for lords. His mother was already waiting for him at home and welcomed his return. Her name was Anna Valencia. Simon was also happy to see her and told her that he had just been helping with the logs. Simon walked over to the stove. His mother told him that he must be hungry by then, but to wait a little longer. He looked at what she was cooking and asked what it was. It was water infused with leharka mushrooms. They looked dangerous even at first glance. And Simon told his mother that they were poisonous, but she was not at all fazed and assured him that he should not worry about anything. She would make them edible with magic. And she began to use her bright light magic on her brew. Dazzled, Simon was shocked by the holiness of this magic. His mother was a former priest and her power fully proved it. Every time he saw her power, Simon wondered how his parents could have met if they were complete opposites. And he imagined his happy parents together. But his thoughts were interrupted by his mother's voice telling him to stop staring at those mushrooms. She asked him why he wasn't going to eat. Hungry, Simon could not disagree. He walked over to the table, which was filled with various tasty and fragrant dishes. They waited for his father to come and started eating together, but Simon ate very little, and his mother noticed. She asked if he was sick. While his father absorbed everything with incredible strength. In the afternoon, when Simon was about to go to his room, he noticed his mother making his father a cucumber face mask. And looking at them, he thought it was as if they were still on their honeymoon, they were so happy. In the evening of that wonderful day, Simon watched the full, beautiful moon from his room. And when he said good night to his parents and was about to close the door to his room, a letter suddenly flew in and stuck right to the face of the surprised Simon, who lost his balance from the surprise. He got up and peeled the letter away from his face, wondering what it was. And when he turned to the window, he noticed a girl sitting on it. She had appeared there as if with the rustling of leaves. And now she was greeting him with a smile on her face. Surprised, Simon was a little scared and could not say anything in response. He turned his back on her without answering, as if he had not seen anything. He thought it was a hallucination or a dream. So he decided to lie down on the bed and fall asleep. However, the girl was not going to give up and jumped into the room screaming. She was screaming at him not to pretend not to see her. But Simon just laid down on his bed and covered himself with a blanket, hoping that by ignoring her he could get rid of her. But the girl didn't give up. She said she knew he could see her. She began to pull off his blanket. She asked him to get up now. But none of them gave up, and each of them pulled the blanket in his own direction. Simon realized that they would not let go of him and exhaled tiredly. Then he sat down on the bed and asked who she was. How did she get here? Was she lost? The girl irritably assured him that she was not lost and that he was stupid. She said confidently that she was here to see him, Simon Valencius. She pointed her finger directly at him. He asked in surprise how she knew his name. And she started to explain about the letter, when... Bam! Simon's parents heard strange noises in his room and burst in. They asked what was going on. Wasn't it a burglar who broke into their house? Both of them in their pajamas, armed with a frying pan and a rolling pin, they looked rather funny or scary, but... The girl who was already sitting on Simon's bed greeted them happily, calling them by name. She knew Richard and Anna. And they knew her. Her name was Naftis and she was very happy to see them. Amazed, Simon watched as his parents greeted this strange visitor with happiness. They noted that she had not changed at all and how much they missed her and she missed them. His parents told Simon to introduce himself with all due courtesy. This is the legendary Neftis Archbold. And she began to look proudly at Simon. And then he began to remember everything he had been told. He looked at her with disbelief. Was it really Neftis Archbold? No way. Are you sure it was Neftis Archbold? She was the one who had made the emperor of the Thalhern Empire her dead puppet. Could she be the same witch of death who had lived for over 300 years? And she told him that yes, she was the very same Nephthys Archbold of Kizen. Excited, Simon began to understand what the letter that had come to him meant. Could it be the same one? And he began to open the letter. Nephthys asked for permission to make him a formal proposal. With a trembling hand he began to take the letter out of the envelope. Opening it, he began to read. It was indeed an invitation. The letter informed him that he had been accepted to study at the Necromancer Academy in Kizen because of his great potential. After he read the letter, Nephthys extended her hand to him and invited him to come to Kizen. As she said goodbye, she told him that they would see each other in Kizen. And she was looking forward to seeing him there. And she disappeared into the moonlight. Simon was left to contemplate the breeze that picked up the leaves and the moonlight that filled everything around him. His father interrupted Simon's thoughts by asking to see the letter. He wanted to examine everything in detail because he was worried about his son, although he always knew that this day would come sooner or later. Simon couldn't help but agree, so he quickly gave the letter to his father. Richard began to read the letter aloud. But Simon interrupted him with a question. He asked his father what the letter meant when it referred to Kizen. His father began to explain to him that it was the center of the Dark Alliance and the headquarters of the Necromancers. This place also serves as a school for the education of young necromancers. The chancellor of this school in Kizen is Nephthys, whom he had just seen. Simon asked incredulously, "Chancellor?" And his memory flashed back to her behavior when she was here, more like a child than an adult. Richard noticed the expression on his son's face and told him that she really didn't look like a chancellor, but that it didn't matter at all, because looks can be deceiving. Simon had so many questions. And he didn't know where to start. The first thing he asked was where was Kizen? Was it far from their home? His father, plunging into old memories, answered that it was really far away. Kizen is located on an island called Roke. And you can get there only by ship, which sails from Langerstein, the capital of the Kingdom of Dresden. Then, on that ship, you have to sail for quite a long time to reach the right island. However, his father assured him that he shouldn't worry, there were many interesting and fun things to do in Langerstein, and the island of Roke itself was an incredibly beautiful place. And Kizen is also known for its stylized uniforms worn by its residents. Surprised, Simon repeated, "Uniforms." Simon asked what was going to happen and how. His mother replied that this would keep him busy until the initiation ceremony began. His father assured him that there was still much to prepare and do to become a necromancer. He should study hard at school to gain the necessary skills. However, first they were going to open his core. The mother asked the father if he wanted to teach his son a little bit of black magic. The father was all for it and said he would be happy to teach him. He also told Simon that he should learn how to breathe properly, so he shouldn't expect to sleep until tomorrow. They had a lot to do. Joyful and confused at the same time, he did not even know what to say to his parents. He was breathless about the upcoming trip. After meeting with Nephthys that day, Simon began the busiest week of his life. There were so many things to prepare for Kizen. His mom and dad had nothing but good things to say about the school and convinced him that he would have fun there and would love it. But the sudden news of their son's departure worried them both. His father continued to teach him. He told him that some spells might hurt, but he had to be patient. And Simon endured all the pain and tried his best. For 3 days this week, he didn't sleep at all as he formed the core with his father's magic. After the grueling hours of core formation, he needed to spend the rest of the day learning breathing techniques and taking a crash course in black magic from his father. A week later, the boy, who had never left his native Les Hill and had spent his entire life here, set off on a journey. He was accompanied by all the servants and his mother. His father went with him. His mother had tears in her eyes and asked them to be careful. The servants were also very concerned about their masters and wished them a safe journey. That was the beginning of their departure to Kizen. They had already traveled some distance and the father continued his black magic lessons. He advised Simon to draw the magical power into his body, which surrounds him everywhere in the air around him. And slowly start to control the mana inside. After that, Simon had to move it through his core. It was as simple as that. His father wondered if he could feel the mana getting harder inside him. Simon did not answer, he was completely focused on the process. The blue energy began to surround him from all sides and it seemed that he was drawing energy from the environment into his core. His father advised him to direct the mana to flow through his hands. He did exactly what his father told him and he succeeded. Now he had to let the mana flow through his fingers. And streams of blue drops flowed down his fingers. Large blue drops seeped out at the tips of his fingers. His father praised him, he was a good boy and a quick learner. Now he knew the source of a necromancer's power. Darkness. Simon looked closely at the dark blue drop on his finger. His father went on to explain to him that the biggest difference between an ordinary magician and a necromancer is in the darkness. Mana has the property of being a gas, which makes it low density and prone to dispersion in the air. On the other hand, darkness is closer to solids or liquids. Therefore, it is easy to bind and change its shape. And he showed him on his hand. So if he uses the properties of darkness, he can shape it into a shape like this. And he showed him a miniature doll on his hand that looked like his mother with a frying pan and a spatula in her hands. Simon was fascinated by this skill. But his father continued to tell him that those who practice and improve their skills in controlling the power based on darkness are called necromancers. And he clenched his fist and smashed the icon he had created before. But since they didn't have a lot of time now, he suggested that Simon focus on the basics of mining the darkness into his core. Simon agreed with his father. And he began to gather the darkness on his hands. At first, it was just a few drops. But then, thanks to his diligence, he managed to form a whole puddle of darkness. Then he began to form something that looked like a hair from a distance, but his creation was shaking and too liquid. And as expected, in a moment his hair spread all over his hands, not holding its shape. His father watched his attempts with a smile. He thought to himself that he could not believe it. He was very impressed and surprised. It usually takes about 6 months to 2 years to learn how to form objects using darkness. But Simon moved in leaps and bounds and achieved it in just 3 days. After a few attempts, he was able to create a stable structure with flowers and a bird. His father, meanwhile, continued to reflect that he knew his son was talented, but he didn't think he was that talented. Such an incredible talent could have shot him in the back. He didn't put off helping him with the core until now, hoping that he wouldn't repeat his mistakes that he made in his youth. Many dark mistakes that he did not want to remember. But on reflection, he realized that it was time to let his talent explode. He hoped his son would do better than him and not make as many mistakes. In the meantime, Simon was busy making something. Then he showed his creation to his father. It was a dark blue fire. He said it was called a midnight glow, a very special kind of fire. His father thoughtfully remarked that his darkness was a beautiful shade of blue. Simon was very excited and asked his father if it was a good thing that his darkness was this midnight blue color. Is it a rare shade for necromancers? Did it make him talented? Or just smiled in response. And then he said that it was just a color and it didn't affect anything. At this news, Simon's hands dropped and his sparkle evaporated. Their carriage stopped with a squeak of wheels. And the driver of their carriage said that they had arrived. His father told him that not at all, this was just the border of the kingdom of Dresden. Here he had to leave it. Simon was saddened by this news, but just in case he asked what he meant. His father replied that he was sorry that he could not tell him the reason. But because of ancient events, he could not enter the territory of the kingdom of Dresden. It was a long time ago and it is a long story. The father began to instruct Simon that he should decide for himself and think before every action. Simon was very confused. Richard assured him that he shouldn't worry, he could guarantee him that he would cope with everything that awaited him better than anyone else. And he is really proud to have such a wonderful son. The father remained standing on the road, watching the carriage that was taking his son to a new life. He wished him good luck and safety on his journey as he saw the last outlines of the carriage in the distance. A week later, they were on the road to the kingdom of Dresden. Simon finally arrived in the capital, which looked like an ordinary city of the late Middle Ages. However, when he entered the city, it was clear that everything was not so simple. In the capital, in the crowd of people, there were no less skeletons, and perhaps even more. And skeletons not only of people, but also of other creatures. It was a beautiful city, Langerstein. One look at it took Simon's breath away. He had never seen such majestic buildings and lively crowds of people before. He realized that this city was very big and he should be on the lookout for trouble. As he walked through the crowd, he kept looking back nervously and clutching his leaflet with the address of his destination. It read, 239, Kamel Road, Langerstein. The conductor would be waiting for him. But this told him nothing at all. He didn't even know what street he was on. He decided to ask some of the people in the crowd. Simon noticed a beautiful girl in the crowd and approached her. He asked if he could ask her to help him. But when she turned to face him, it turned out that one of her eyeballs was just hanging on a muscle and dangling at the level of her chin. She politely asked how she could help. Simon was in a very uncomfortable position. He could barely stop himself from running away or pulling away from her, because that would be rude. Restraining himself and stammering, he managed to ask how he could get to the address written on the note. He handed her the note with trembling hands. She leaned over and looked at the note with her abnormal eyes. She made Simon hold back even more, and he was ready to run away. But she quickly replied that she knew where Kamel Road was. And she pointed to a square up the street. He was to walk across the square, turn right, and there he would see a street covered with gilded tiles. This would be Kamel Road, one of Langerstein's famous landmarks. Simon was happy to hear that it was not far away. He politely thanked this strange young girl. She appreciated his behavior and called him a polite boy. She wished him safety and good luck with his business in Langerstein. Simon wished her the same and hurried to the square through the crowd. Simon did not notice it, but as soon as he got away from the lady, a man who was secretive and unnoticeable in the crowd approached her. He started asking her questions too. With all his charisma, he asked her for a favor. But Simon did not notice this and carefully reread his note again as he walked to the square. Meanwhile, the person who was supposed to meet Simon could not wait for him and asked herself why he was taking so long. She wondered if he might have gotten lost himself. Simon was in trouble. The man who had been chasing him turned out to be a common mugger who had spotted the rich newcomer as a gawker in town. And now Simon felt very sorry for letting his father down. He was in an alley with a whole gang of robbers, who were now ordering him to throw everything he had on the ground. His bag, his clothes, absolutely everything. They were laughing at such a foolish commoner who was so easy to deceive and trap. Simon thought that now he would probably have to arrive in Kizen later than expected. And now we fast forward an hour earlier to see how he got into such trouble. Simon was standing on Kamel Road looking at the house numbers. Suddenly, someone approached him. A young man asked him if he was going to 239, Kamel Road. Simon was excited, he thought it was the guide mentioned in the note. And the man confirmed it to him. He said that he was his guide. And he is here because he did not come on time to the address. He thought that his guest must be lost and so he started looking for him until he found him here. Simon shook the man's hand and told him that he was glad to meet him. He introduced himself and said his name was Simon Valencia. The man also introduced himself as Rowley, the Langerstein guide. This so-called guide invited him to follow him, he would lead him first to his accommodation. On the way, the guide told him that he was glad he found the boy before he got into trouble. There are so many bandits in this city trying to rip off inattentive tourists. This is when Simon started to have questions. Something was wrong here, and he knew what it was. Seeing his questioning expression, the guide clarified that he meant pickpockets, muggers, overpriced vendors, all those things. But Simon didn't let on, he was watching this pseudo-guide carefully. When they came to an alley, Simon said to this guide, "So that's why you're trying to rob me like this too?" The guide froze in his tracks, not expecting this turn. However, he quickly composed himself and quickly put a smile on his face. He casually replied that he didn't quite understand what the guy meant. Simon then began to explain to him that he was constantly looking down, and constantly holding his lower vest pocket to check if his thing was still with him, right? Then he went on to say that judging by the size of the pocket and the crease, it was a knife. The guide was very surprised by the boy's observation. He started to make excuses again, saying that it was all just for self-defense and that he had misunderstood. But it was already clear that his lie was falling apart. Finally, Simon pointed out to him that Howl was the name of a goat living in Loss Hill. Guide Rowley was terrified. The guide was shaking. He asked Simon why he followed him knowing all this. What kind of a madman is he? And he pulled his knife out of his pocket. This seemed to be a sign to his accomplices, who immediately surrounded Simon. Feeling the support of his accomplices, the pseudo-guide felt more confident. And swearing, he told Simon that in the end it didn't matter who he was. He would beg for mercy in front of all of them. Now he will put everything he has on the ground. His bag, his clothes, absolutely everything. Simon calmly refused, even though he was surrounded by robbers on all sides. Another of the robbers threatened him with a knife and told him that he was a guy from the village and did not quite see the whole picture. Simon made a quick movement and asked if it looked like he couldn't see anything now. The angry robber rushed at him with a knife and shouted that they would kill him right there. But Simon easily dodged his stab. And he calmly looked at the surprised robber, preparing for a counterattack. Then he quickly grabbed his wrist and squeezed it so that he dropped his knife to the ground. A loud crunch of broken bone followed, and the accomplices were frightened and shocked. Simon told them that sometimes he met people like them on his property. He was still holding the unfortunate thief's hand. He called them scum, mixing with good people and then ripping them off in the name of protection fees and other nonsense. And it was his duty as the heir to the Lord to cleanse and destroy all such filth as they were. And when they heard that he was a nobleman, they told him that this was even more reason why they would not let him leave. Their leader, Riley, shouted for everyone to come. And more robbers came out of the houses nearby. Simon thought that unfortunately he was going to have to stay here because of this trouble. Then a beautiful black-haired girl appeared in the alley, wearing gold earrings decorated with rubies. She said with relief that she had finally found him. She walked down the alley, clacking her high heels. Some of the bandits began to pay attention to her. But she was talking to Simon. She had been waiting for him for so long that she had to go look for him herself, since he hadn't shown up. Riley asked irritably, "What else?" The girl with black hair stopped holding one of the locks of her luxurious hair in her hand. She turned to Simon that it looked like he was dealing with some small annoying things at the moment. Riley replied to her not to worry, they were outnumbered and were going to deal with him quickly and get out of here. But the girl advised her to do her math. The wall of one of the houses nearby cracked and began to fall apart, scattering debris. With noise and cracking, bones began to break through the wall of stone and wood. The girl asked if they knew that this building was a skeleton shop. Dozens of skeletons began to emerge from the gap in the wall, banging their bones. The frightened bandits only managed to shout that it was a necromancer. But it was too late. One word from the girl and all the skeletons attacked the robbers. None of them could escape. They did not know mercy and did not pay any attention to the screams of these poor idiots. Riley was speechless at the sight of the skeleton. But the fear for his life overcame everything and he began to shout that he was very sorry that they did not recognize her, begging for mercy and mercy. The girl asked him what clan he belonged to. Riley replied that they were from the Claven clan. She was not impressed by his answer. Why, if he was from such a great clan, was he picking the pockets of a poor tourist? Let me go and explain to the clan leader myself. And then she ordered the skeleton holding him to put his head on the ground with both his hands behind his back, and then make him crawl on his face all the way to the city guard headquarters, where he would have to confess to them and turn himself in. Riley was still begging for mercy. The girl quietly whispered to him that she did not know what mercy was. Then, furiously, she asked if it was an order to her. Then she calmed down a bit and told everyone present that if he did something differently than she told him, or if his face was not wiped enough, she would know. And then his entire clan would be wiped off the face of the planet in the name of Kizen. The bandit asked for nothing more, only that he was sorry and would remember her words forever. Simon just watched this performance from behind the girl's back. When the skeletons dragged the robbers away, the girl turned to him and said that he must be Simon Valencia, right? He answered in the affirmative and immediately thanked her for her help with the robbers. But he still did not know her name or who she was. To which she replied with a smile that she was his true guide. She quickly grabbed his hand and pulled him along. On the way, she told him that her mother was waiting for them. Simon did not understand what her mother had to do with it. When they arrived, her mother was not there. And the girl started looking for her. She wondered where she could have gone again, since she had been told to wait here. Then her eyes fell on an ice cream cart and a girl with white hair next to it. A scream interrupted her as she was about to take the ice cream and was covered in it. The girl with black hair was annoyed and told her that she had told her to stay here. Why didn't she listen? She started to make excuses, saying that she was waiting. But her daughter didn't stop arguing, because she was always getting lost, so she should stop going everywhere alone. She started wiping her dirty face with a handkerchief. The girl's mother kept making excuses that she only went because there was an event with free ice cream samples to try and she couldn't resist. Her daughter replied to her, what if they had lost Simon because of that? What if she hadn't found Simon first, what would have happened to them? Simon watched this family quarrel and was shocked to find out that Nephthys was the girl's mother, not her younger sister, as he had first thought. In the background, Nephthys said that she was not sorry for her behavior, because everything was fine and they had not lost the student. Then, having ended their quarrel with nothing, Nephthys finally turned her attention to Simon. She told him that he was probably tired after the trip and she hoped he had learned something from his father. Simon replied that he had indeed learned something. And then he decided to show what he had learned and lit his midnight blue fire. The two girls stared at him in awe. Nephthys said that she had not seen such a shade of darkness for a long time. But it still had the properties of mana. Because this light was swirling like real fire, which meant that it was still in a gaseous state. She was also sure that he would learn to use his core more effectively. And they would definitely teach him that at school. So everything was fine and there was nothing to worry about. Then Nephthys asked her daughter Lorraine to do something for her. She asked her to be a guide for the new student. And she assured her that she believed in her. Lorraine wasn't thrilled with the idea because her mother always left her with the heavy lifting. But for Nephthys, there was no such thing as a no, so she ran off merrily with the ice cream for more ice cream. Then Lorraine finally introduced herself officially to Simon. Her name was Lorraine Arbold and she was a student at Kizen like him. And she unceremoniously grabbed his hand again. She asked him if he was ready to go now. When he asked where they were going, Lorraine happily told him they were going shopping for the new semester at school. Simon, do you know what the most exciting moment of the entire school year was? Lorraine asked him. He didn't know, so he just asked what it was. She told him that it's when you buy your uniforms, notebooks, textbooks and other supplies before you get to school. This is the most exciting moment, so he should enjoy it. So they went to the bookstore together. Lorraine asked if he wanted to get his textbooks first. There was a very large selection, so she would help him. Simon was all for it because everything was new and different for him. At first Lorraine threw him one book and Simon thought it would be easy. But as soon as he picked it up, he almost dropped it. It was very heavy. He read the title on the cover. It was Introduction to Summonology by Elric Moore Trimble. As soon as he read the title, another book was already flying into his hands. A flurry of books flew at him, and he barely had time to cover himself with his hands, trying to shout to Lorraine. Simon was frightened by so many books, so he said he hoped he wouldn't have to study all these subjects in the first year. Lorraine reassured him that of course not. He has to take them all in the first semester of his freshman year. She told him not to be a crying baby and threw another book of toxicology at him. Beaten by books and surrounded by books, he sat on the floor. Lorraine, meanwhile, was about to go get the last book for him, Dynamics of Darkness. While she was gone, he had some time to himself, put his books in a pile and began to think. He had never met so many people his age. This made him only wait and dream about his future life at school. Then a girl with pink hair appeared in the background and started running fast. She was running somewhere and didn't notice Simon at all. Then she noticed him and looked right into his face. But because of this, she lost her balance and ran right into a shelf of books. And while she was screaming about her nose, which she hit, the shelf started to wobble and books started to fall right on top of her. But our hero reacted quickly and decided to cover her with his body. She just squinted her eyes helplessly. When everything calmed down, the girl began to apologize, convincing him that it was her fault and that she was fine. Simon told her that everything was fine and that he was partly to blame, as he was standing in her way and distracted her. Then he asked her if she was okay, if she could help him pick up all these scattered books. Otherwise, if they didn't, they might get yelled at. She gladly agreed. While they were picking up the books, they started a conversation and she asked if he was also a new student at Kizen. Simon confirmed her guess. Then she happily introduced herself, saying that her name was Cindy Vivaci and she was a new student. She asked what his name was. He introduced himself as Simon Valencia. She was very pleased to meet him. Cindy told him that she was from a remote town in the north, so she didn't have any close friends here yet. Simon assured her that she was not alone, and they were in this boat together, because he had no friends yet either. Cindy's eyes lit up. She could not believe her ears. Then she asked if it would be okay for him if. And she stopped in mid-sentence. Finally, she made up her mind and asked if she could say hello to him at school. Simon happily replied that of course he would. He was going to ask her the same thing. When they finished putting their books away, Sandy said she had to run because her father was waiting for her. Simon assured her that he would be waiting to meet her at school. And when she was about to leave, Simon asked her to wait. He asked her if she would mind returning his wallet. She was caught and surprised, but it didn't upset her at all. Cindy began to make excuses. She thought she wouldn't get caught because she had used spiritual magic to steal the wallet. She wondered how he had noticed. Simon began to explain that he had noticed his wallet flying out of his pocket along with the books falling down. Cindy wondered how he could have just noticed that. He must be playing a trick on her. She asked if he was going to become a master in spiritualism as well. Simon replied that he hadn't decided yet. Then Cindy poked him right in the chest with her finger and assured him that she knew it. Kizen is on a whole other level. She can't believe it. Kizen must be full of kids like him. She can't wait any longer to start school. Simon, on the other hand, was worried about something else entirely. Why is she so shameless, pickpocketing and looking so cute at the same time? Cindy was jumping for joy. She was so excited about the possibility of going to school with Simon and seeing him for 3 years. She suggested that they compete to see who would be the best when the time came. And she finally gave him back his wallet. Cindy assured him that she was looking forward to seeing him at school and that she hoped he wouldn't be a stranger when he met her there. And she just walked through the bookshelf with her magic. Then Lorraine finally returned. She informed him that the store did not have Introduction to Dark Dynamics in stock right now, but as soon as it did they would deliver it along with his other books to his dorm. Simon was completely satisfied with this option, but his mind was on something else. Lorraine also asked him who the girl was and if he had already made friends with her. Simon answered with some hesitation that he had. But Lorraine completely misunderstood his uncertainty and winked and assured him that he shouldn't be so embarrassed. He could be honest with her, and she could tell him if he liked the girl or not. Simon just thought to himself that she had almost stolen his wallet. So he just didn't show any emotion and Lorraine lost interest in the conversation. Then Lorraine said they had to go. They had already found all the books they needed and it was time to put them all in a bag. Simon looked at his bag and at the huge pile of books. And he had questions. Lorraine saw his look and understood. Not the bag he had. It was a different bag, a bag used by necromancers. It's called a magical inventory, and to put it in simpler terms, necromancers call it subspace. Simon was fascinated by such an amazing thing. They went to another store, where they were greeted by a nice elderly lady, who probably owned the store. She knew that Lorraine had recently purchased a special bag for herself, which meant that it was time to find a bag for this gentleman. Lorraine confirmed her guess, but added that he was a beginner, so he should choose a bag with the fewest restrictions. When the saleswoman approached the display case, Lorraine read an inscription on one of the rings that were actually magic bags. You don't need walls or floors to use subspace, often we fight on the open plain when it comes to the real battle. To which the store owner replied that she has great eyesight and taste. And if it is a special case, she can show a prototype that has not yet been released to the mass market. She would make an exception just for them. And she held out this special ring to Simon. He immediately put it on. Lorraine told him that he should feel the darkness flowing through him into this ring. Then he should feel something like a touch. And Simon felt it as if he had touched a handle or a lever. Then Lorraine told him to pull and imagine it was a lever. And when he pulled it, a huge rectangular hole appeared on the floor. The salesperson explained to them that this was the latest product from Gel Anicaps, a young master craftsman of the next generation. This subspace can withstand a load of up to 4,000 pounds. And it can open on any surface, even on slopes and uneven surfaces. The subspace itself is enchanted with 7 spells, including level 1 preservation and temperature control. And more importantly, using this bag activates invisibility to hide your location from enemies. Lorraine asked about the function of releasing the contents. And she was told that it was also included. Simon was delighted. Lorraine asked if he liked it and Simon said that he was thrilled, but he wasn't sure if he could afford it. This bag must be very expensive. Lorraine didn't understand his question. Maybe. And she loudly asked the saleswoman Stephanie how much it cost. She answered 5,000 gold coins. Simon's jaw dropped at the price. It was the amount of Lasho's budget for several years. But Lorraine didn't seem to be embarrassed by this amount of money. She said she would take it. Simon was shocked that she was going to buy it for him. But Lorraine told him that he had nothing to worry about, it was not her money, it was her mother's. Lorraine then explained to him that she didn't know all the details, but that Naftis owed Simon's parents a lot of money. And so it's like she's returning the favor. So he shouldn't turn down the offer. But Simon knew that this was a big gift for him. How could he ever repay Naftis? Lorraine advised him not to even think about it. If he wanted to repay her mother, he should just study hard and behave well at Kizen. Simon was sure that he would try his best and do his best. And they left the store together, thanking him for his services. Now that they had everything they needed, they could have some fun. Lorraine was very insistent on it, but Simon was not sure. But Lorraine assured him that it was part of their routine and dragged him along. She took him to a shooting range where toy skulls of skeletons wearing helmets were lined up in several rows. Lorraine put a crossbow in Simon's hands and told him to shoot at the stuffed skulls. He started to try and as it turned out he was very good at it. It was evening and as they walked up one of the streets of the city, Lorraine said it was the highest point in the city. Around them were many couples lighting flying lanterns. They also lit one and sent it flying. Lorraine said that this city is one of the most popular among tourists and is called the Square of 1,000 Lanterns. She asked him what he thought. Simon simply replied that he wondered if there were really thousands of fools here who wanted to spend 200 silver coins on a piece of flammable, oily paper. Lorraine, after this answer, said that he would be successful in Kizen. Simon thought it was a compliment and thanked her. But it turned out that it wasn't. And Simon continued to stare at the lights in the sky, a little embarrassed. Then they went to dinner. They chose a nice place on the waterfront.